Hello everyone, my name is Elliot Geltz, and today has been a learning experience. I have learned that Amazon is a terrible, terrible business for a lot of reasons, primary of which would be that they messed up sending me my webcam. So we're going to deal with this format for just a little while longer. A little less Wendigoon, a little more exploring series. So I am deeply sorry for depriving you of wonderful blessing that is my handsome face. So, today, under this format, I am bringing you a very special video. We are going to be talking about my personal top 5 Xenos factions in Warhammer 40k. My last video on Warhammer was about my top 5 Imperial factions, my top 5 human factions, because the human faction is typically the one people can relate to the most when they are first getting into a piece of sci-fi media. However, some people don't. Some people want to see the exotic alien races that are present in a setting. So to that end, I am going to be talking about my top 5 favorite aliens in Warhammer. Hopefully, if you're getting into Warhammer, you'll latch on to at least one of these and look deeper and find one you like as much as I like these 5. So, with no further ado, our first of this list. The Asuryani, or the Eldar, were one of the most powerful empires to ever grace the Milky Way galaxy a long time prior to the events of modern day 40k. They held a empire that spanned the entire breadth of the Milky Way and provided for its citizens in every feasible way. No one went without food or sustenance or shelter or medical care or anything. Everyone had everything they could possibly want or need in their lives. And because of this overabundance of resources, the Eldar eventually succumbed to overindulgence and depravity, their empire steadily declining into a place where not only were you provided for in every way in regards to your needs, but also in terms of your wants, in terms of entertainment and things to occupy your time. And as Eldar got bored with more conventional means of entertaining themselves, they slowly crept towards more depraved acts, like murder and torture and the consumption of various drugs and psychotics and all sorts of things. As the civilization continued its decline up to its lowest point, all of this negative energy and feelings steadily coalesced in the warp into an entity now known as Slaanesh, the fourth primary chaos god, the Lord of Excess. When Slaanesh was born from the height of depravity in the Eldar Empire, they came into being, murdered and consumed countless billions of Eldar, and scattered the rest across the Milky Way, completely breaking their empire. In the wake of this event, many Eldar found their own way of coping both with the loss of their empire and the new reality that upon death, their souls were consigned to Slaanesh due to Slaanesh's bond with the Eldar. They are inherently tied together. When an Eldar dies, like proper, full-on, soul gone to the warp death, it is Slaanesh that inherently gets their soul unless some other being or mechanic intercedes for the Eldar. To stave off this fate, the Drukhari are the Eldar that continued their debaucherous ways. They torture people and each other and themselves, and create as much suffering and pain as possible to slake Slaanesh's thirst and keep them at bay, so that the Drukhari can keep living their lives how they were during the fall of the Eldar Empire. One of the premier factions that keeps this going would be the Witch Cults. The Witch Cults are a mostly female faction inside the Drukhari who whose primary purpose is gladiatorial combat. Not every Drukhari is capable of going out and catching slaves to bring back in torture, or continuously torturing slaves to sustain themselves on a day-to-day basis. The most efficient, I guess you could say, method of getting the most pain out of captives and feeding as many Eldar as possible is public events of torture and gladiatorial combat. The Drukhari will go out in pirate raids. They will harass Imperial settlements, other Xenos civilizations, anyone they can find, capture as many people as they can, and then drag them back to the Drukhari capital of Kamara, where they will be used to slake the thirst of Slaanesh and keep them off the Drukhari's back. One of the methods done with this is captives will be thrown into gladiatorial combat in these public events for all of the populace of Kamara to witness and feed off of. The captives are thrown into the arena and either not armed in the slightest and functionally fed to horrible monstrosities, or given weapons to see how long they can last in combat. The pain and suffering of this combat feeding all of the Drukhari in the stands watching it and sustaining their lives further and keeping Slaanesh from feeding off of them. The witch cults are the premier gladiators of Drukhari society. These women, and sometimes men, the Drukhari for all of their faults are egalitarian, are premier combatants. They are incredibly agile, they're incredibly dexterous, they're incredibly strong. They are some of the best combatants the Drukhari have to offer, to the point that the vast majority of witch cult combatants are capable of standing toe-to-toe against Adeptus Astartes and having a solid chance of coming out on top, even if it's more of a coin flip than the Drukhari would particularly favor. What makes the witch cult so unique amongst the Drukhari is that they're very Spartan in their loadouts and their methodology. They very rarely go into combat with any kind of armor, because the whole purpose of their combat is to create as much pain as possible and to train themselves to be as skilled as possible. So if they have armor, that means they could potentially just tank a blow and survive, when they're trying to train to be the most agile and dexterous and skilled of any combatant the Drukhari can put forth. So they go into combat both outside of Kamara in pirate raids and in the Colosseum without a particularly great deal of armor to push themselves to dodge and evade as well as possible. They do carry a multitude of armaments. However, they typically use very simple bladed weapons for the purpose of getting in close and savoring the pain they are inflicting on their opponents. And also because these weapons are typically very good at causing as much pain for the pleasure and sustenance of the Drukhari watching these events. The witch cults are only one of many of the internal Drukhari factions, but I feel like they encapsulate the Drukhari the most, abandoning any sense of conventional reason, like using armor or conventional tactics or anything you would want in combat, all for the sake of this ultimately pointless drive to stave off Slaanesh. Everything the Drukhari do, from the pain they inflict on themselves, to the wild lengths they go to all the pain they inflict on the rest of the galaxy, is all for the sake of their own pitiful survival, their own decadence, their own way of life that is killing them. And I feel like the witch cults ultimately encapsulate that the best. Not all Eldar went the path of the Drukhari during their fall, and continued their debaucherous ways to stave off Slaanesh. Others formed Craftworlds, which are places where the Eldar pretty much do the opposite of the Drukhari. They still engage in sexual relations, and they still engage in some means of entertainment and slight excesses to keep their lives happy, but for the most part they are entirely dedicated to an almost religious practice of dedicating their mind and spirit to different services of their society, and through these services keeping their minds sharp to keep away from Slaanesh. These Eldar, the Craftworlders, avoid death by keeping their souls trapped in soulstones, which can be recovered from their allies in the event of their death in battle, so that Eldar's soul doesn't go to Slaanesh. They can be used in other ways. The third possible fate for an Eldar is the Exodites. During the peak of the Eldar Empire, not every Eldar was particularly keen on what the Empire was doing. Some saw the writing on the wall and thought the total planet-wide murder orgies were a bad thing and that they should stop it, and maybe there are unforeseen consequences to having vast planet-wide murder orgies. To which the Eldar, totally keen on the planet-wide murder orgies, were like, lol, get stuff, nerd, we're going to do it anyway, up until the creation of Slaanesh. These Eldar that saw the writing on the wall and wanted to stop things eventually started to break away from Eldar society, leading up to the birth of Slaanesh. These Eldar are the Exodites. Exodites are Eldar that live very rustic, basic lives on the fringes of space on very low-tech worlds. That isn't to say they're like cavemen. They still have advanced ranged weaponry and armor and all sorts of technology. They just aren't as advanced as the rest of the Eldar in the Craftworlds and the Drukhari. They are roughly, if you were going to ballpark it, their most advanced technology is on par with the Imperial, and they are lacking in other ways that they make up for with more analog solutions. Of particular note is that the Exodites are rather nomadic. On the Exodite planets, they tend to live hunter-gatherer lifestyles, following around herds of other Xenos races, like vast megafauna, like you would have found on Earth during its ice age. And they will hunt the creatures that they live off of for food and parts to craft their clothing and shelters with, and they will live off the land in more agricultural societies, and that is the extent of their technological development. They are living these hunter-gatherer nomadic herd-following lifestyles to keep themselves in check and keep their touch with Slaanesh at bay. Of particular note about the Exodites that makes them super cool is the fact that they ride giant alien dinosaurs in the battle. That's fucking rad. And it's also the primary reason that they're on the list is I love dinosaurs and they ride dinosaurs. That's all I need. If you were looking for a model to put on your shelf as a display piece to, I don't know, strike up conversation during your house parties. Like, I like this thing called Warhammer 40k. What's it about? Look at this thing. This is a space elf riding a alien triceratops. That's all you need to know. That's fucking rad. Aside from the dinosaur thing, I really like the Exodites in that they're kind of a counterpoint to the Drukhari, because the Drukhari are all about, oh, we have to keep torturing people and having the planet-wide murder orgies, because how else are we going to starve off Slaanesh? And then you have the Exodites right next door, just farming. Just like following around alien woolly mammoths. And they're doing perfectly fine. You guys just want to murder and torture. Like, you don't have to. That's bullshit. I like how everything about the Drukhari. The Drukhari are easily the most built up and fluffed out of the Eldar factions currently. There are a great number of books that either feature the Drukhari or are about the Drukhari, and the Drukhari are one of the foremost players on the galactic stage. And I love how just the presence of the Exodites demonstrates the Drukhari are full of shit, and all of their nonsense about having to do what they do to survive Slaanesh is just that. It's nonsense. I really like that about the Exodites. Moving away from the Eldar to their polar opposite, the Orcs, we have the Freebooters. Now, most orcs engage in a form of warfare most would find to some extent conventional. Shooting the enemy, running up and slashing the enemy on massive campaigns that cover entire planets. Even if it is hectic and blunt, most people recognize the orcs as engaging in conventional warfare. The freebooters are not like that. The freebooters are space pirates that engage almost exclusively in ship to ship combat. They roam around in their ships and will attack anything they find drifting in space, be it Imperial ships, Eldar ships, even Tyranid bioships. They will attack anything. They will ram their ship into their target, opening up a door. Whether or not this process creates a perfect vacuum seal so that any combatants can breathe and survive is irrelevant to them. And they will board the enemy ship, murder everything in sight, take whatever they want, and bounce. That is the extent of the freebooter strategy and combat doctrine. It works well for them. So I'm not going to tell them how to do their jobs. The ability to breathe is typically advisable. The orcs, as long as they're not thinking about it, don't tend to care. So that's not a factor for them. Of note is that the freebooters have a very strong, very goofy pirate aesthetic. They wear the traditional pirate hat with the three corners, even with the skull and crossbones on it. How and where they picked up that iconography in world, I have no idea. I know they wear it out of narrative because it's goofy and funny and they are space pirates. So the orc space pirates wear pirate hats. It's so on track for orcs. It fits them. But where they picked up this iconography in Warhammer 40k's narrative, I have no idea. And honestly, I don't want to know. I just like to think the orcs found this stuff in like an Imperial actors troupe ship and like just thought it was cool. That's where I think the freebooters got their pirate iconography. But that's all there is to them, and you know what? That's all they need. This is a lot simpler than the other entries on the list, but I feel like Warhammer could use just some of that. Not everything needs very deep, expansive lore as to why it is the way it is, and why it does what it does. The freebooters are space pirates. They're fun space pirates. That's all they need to be, and that's all they should be. The Tau are a very contentious race, both in universe and outside of the Warhammer 40k universe. A lot of people have particular feelings about the Tau, and it's very fortunate for me and my comment section, both that I'm talking about the Tau very early in my channel's life, and also that we're not talking about the Tau at large. We are talking about one of the most beloved internal factions of the Tau. We are talking about the Farside Enclaves. Now, to give a little bit of context, the Tau are a very minor, very small-time empire that only controls a tiny corner of the Milky Way galaxy. What makes them of note in the grand scheme of things is how rapidly they have advanced. In just a few thousand years, they have gone from cavemen banging rocks together to an interstellar empire with highly advanced technology that eclipses that of the Imperium in the modern 40k setting. That is what makes the Tau so outstanding compared to the Imperium and the Eldar and the other factions that are spread all across the Milky Way. This one race in this one tiny corner has managed to arm itself and develop to a point where it can rival these larger factions on a technological level. So given another 3,000 years or so, which is nothing in the scale of Warhammer, who knows what they could achieve. What makes the Farside Enclave interesting is the Farside Enclave is a group that has broken away from the main rulers of the Tau Empire. Commander Farsight, its leader, looked at the Ethereals, the leaders at the head of the Tau caste system, looked at what they were doing, looked at how they were running the Empire, and thought, this is horseshit. I don't like this. I'm going to bounce and take as many of my followers as I can with me. And so he broke away and formed his own society, the Farside Enclave. The difference between the two is that the Enclave is significantly more egalitarian and doesn't follow the rigid caste system of the Tau Empire proper. Tau are divided into castes: fire caste, water caste, earth caste, air caste, and then the ethereals at the top, with each caste having its own role in Tau society. The Farsight Enclaves want to do away with this and both treat individual Tau better than their caste would permit them, and also treat the various races the Tau Empire has brought into its fold better. This is not working out well for the Enclave. They have gotten their shit kicked around pretty harshly in the past few years. However, what makes the Enclave interesting, to me at least, is that they are still holding on. It's very similar to the Lamenters. Like, why is this Space Marine chapter that's whole shtick is they're super unlucky and they lose all the time and they get their butts kicked? Why would you love them? And it's the fact that despite all the hardship they've been through, the Lamenters are still one of the most kind-hearted and devoted Space Marine chapters. Despite all of the losses they've sustained, despite all of the horrible luck that's befallen them, they are still out there defending Imperial citizens, still protecting the Imperium at large. And I love the Farsight Enclave for similar reasons. Despite all of the bad luck that's befallen them, despite all of the horrible tragedy and horrible losses that have befallen the Enclave, Farsight and his followers are still holding to their ideals, still fighting the good fight, still fighting to make a good place in Warhammer 40k's Milky Way galaxy. And being one of the only people doing so, they have my support. Of note for Farsight specifically would be two things. One, he and his 8 followers, the 8 commanders that serve under him, are some of the only Tau that engage in melee combat. It's only in their mech suits because the Tau are weak little noodle-armed bitches, but they are still engaging enemies in melee with power swords and whatnot. So that gets a vote of my confidence for them, because most Tau, it's a running gag that in all the cover art on codexes and whatnot, the Tau are always losing, because if you were to depict the Tau winning in art, it would just be them standing around shooting at targets miles away. The Tau are very dedicated to their range combat, and they're very effective at it. But it's nice to see that some Tau aren't afraid to get their hands dirty and are willing to engage in melee when it's necessary. It also looks badass. Like, I'm going to find the best pictures I can of Farsight and his 8, I think they're 8? Yeah, they're 8. His 8 Ronin that serve under him. Just look how cool they are. This looks awesome. Secondarily of note for Farsight and himself is that Khorne has started to pay attention. In the last, not the last Arc of Omens book, but the last book to feature Farsight in the Arc of Omens series, Farsight was struggling with the temptations of Khorne, and Khorne's influence creeping into his mind and tempting him to give up on his ideals and just become a bloodthirsty slaughterer. And first off, Farsight resisted. Holy shit. Kudos to the man for resisting one of the most powerful forces in the warp. And also, Farsight is such an accomplished commander and warrior that Khorne himself wants a hold of Farsight. That says a great deal about how accomplished and how skilled Farsight is. So the Tau, a lot of people don't like for a bunch of various reasons. The Farsight Enclaves are cool. And Farsight and his boys are cool. And I am super down with them. The Tyranids are a race wildly different from anything else in the Milky Way. They are an adaptive insectoid race that will invade planets, devour everything in sight, reducing all biomass they find down to a raw toxic sludge, which their bioships then absorb to feed the greater Hive fleet. And then after reducing a planet down to nothing, reducing it to a bare rock hovering in space, they will then move on to the next. Their goal being to scour the galaxy of all life to consume and make into biomass for itself. The Tyranids are divided into Hive fleets, each Hive fleet having a different gimmick that makes it distinct from the rest. Some will create life forms that are larger and tougher than their counterparts. Some will specialize in more acidic and biowarfare. Some will focus on stealth and infiltration, and flooding a planet with Tyranid life forms without the populace even being aware of it, then attacking once it's too late and the Tyranids are already covering the planet. Of note amongst the Hive fleets, because the Tyranids as a whole are very interesting, but of note amongst the Hive fleets is Hive Fleet Tiamat. As I just described, the Tyranids are a very nomadic race. They go from world to world, purging it of all life, consuming everything they find, and then moving on. Hive Fleet Tiamat is different. Hive Fleet Tiamat settled on a very specific planet, and then did not scour it of life. The Tyranid life forms have taken prisoners and are keeping a slave populace of humans to breed and continuously feed off of, amongst other races, I'm assuming. The system in which Tiamat has settled has been utterly overrun with different tyrannic life forms, but not like things we've seen elsewhere in the galaxy. Typically, the Tyranids will invade, consume biomass, and then produce Tyranid life forms that are meant to engage in combat, and kill things, and go around eating. But the life forms seen in the system Tiamat has settled seem more like they're integrating with the ecosystems of these planets instead of totally taking them over. Of note to all of this is that it seems like Tiamat is constructing a massive tower of some kind. All that is known about it is that it has a very powerful psychic resonance, to the point that an Eldar scout team that was sent to investigate was totally overpowered just being around it and killed just by the resonant psychic energy around this tower. It seems as if this tower is Hive Fleet Tiamat's objective. They have taken over this solar system that they've set up in, integrated themselves into all of the local Death World ecosystems, are taking captive human and alien workers to help build this thing, all for whatever purpose this tower is going to serve. What that purpose is, we don't know. It is a giant mystery that has yet to be answered, and likely won't ever be answered. And I kind of honestly want it to stay that way. I like that there's this one Hive fleet that is doing something wildly different from the assumed scouring of planets that the rest of the Hive fleets are doing. I like how there's so much conjecture you could throw around with it. A lot of people hold to the theory that because the Tyranids came from outside the Milky Way, which they did, they're a race of organisms that came from somewhere else. They are invaders to the Milky Way itself, and they were brought due to the Astronomicon of the Emperor finally lighting to full strength upon his ascension to the Golden Throne, the light of the Astronomicon drawing the Tyranids' attention to the Milky Way. A lot of people assume that because this massive tower has such a powerful psychic signature, it is serving a similar purpose. It is giving a landmark of sorts for more Tyranid forces outside the Milky Way to find their way in, or giving them a secondary point to triangulate and navigate with, so that Tyranid bioships have the Astronomicon on Terra and this other tower as 2 points of reference to navigate their way through space. Or it could be something much more sinister and fucked up that we just have no idea what it is. I just love it. I just love the mystery around this thing Hive Fleet Tiamat is doing. We have no idea what it is. It breaks all of the convention of the Tyranids, and there are so many questions you can raise, all of which would have fascinating answers to find out. And I hope we don't find out. I kind of hope this mystery stays preserved. But yeah, the Tyranids as a whole should make this list. Like, they're so interesting. And they themselves break a lot of the tropes and conventions of the rest of the factions in the greater Milky Way. But Hive Fleet Tiamat itself breaks the conventions of the Tyranids and is doing something very interesting on this one death world in this one corner, where, who knows, maybe they're orchestrating the end of all life in the Milky Way itself. Or maybe they're just making a giant psychic lighthouse. Who knows? So that is five. This one, it feels like this one didn't have as much bite as the Imperial factions did. If it didn't, I apologize. But this has been 5 different Xenos factions. These are 5 of my favorites. I find them all very interesting in their own ways, and I hope you did too. And if you don't, I hope I've at least demonstrated that there is a great deal of variety to the factions of Warhammer, both internal to the Imperium. Like, just the human faction has so much more than just being the human faction going for them. They have so much internal variety and so many different things you can play with. But that's not just isolated to the human faction. It also extends to all of the different alien factions. The orcs, I could make a whole long ass, several hours long video about all the different kind of orcs present, or all the different internal factions of the Drukhari, or about the different Craftworlders, or about all the different Hive fleets of the Tyranids. Like, this is so expansive, and there's so much to find here. And I hope you either found something you like as much as I did out of this list, or I hope I've at least demonstrated that variety enough that you can go and comb through the 40k wiki or the codices and find factions you like as much as I like these. And that has been kind of the whole point of my Warhammer videos. I don't want you to just settle for what I'm telling you or what other YouTubers are telling you. I would love it if these videos, both the ones I make and the ones others make, prompt you to go read the novels or read the codices or go explore this setting for yourself, because it's so expansive and so rich, and I love it so much, and I hope you come to love it as much as I do. My name is Elliot Geltz, and thank you for spending this time with me. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a good day.